I know a lot of people were expecting really big things out of the New Orleans Saints in 2014. I believe I had them being like the last wild card team in the NFC. Hell, I saw some people picking this team to win the Super Bowl. And after seeing what transpired in 2014 with this Saints team and their 7-9 record, maybe we should have been smarter. Maybe we should have been able to see some of the writing on the wall. Maybe in part it was an overreaction to their 2013 season and the automatic assumption with Sean Payton and Drew Brees there that there was nowhere to go for them but up. Maybe that's part of it. Maybe in part it's a problem of the New Orleans Saints and the arrogance of the belief in their system. Because this is a team that has enjoyed quite a bit of success under head coach Sean Payton and quarterback Drew Brees. But they're not as good of a team as they once were. But maybe it's that kind of arrogance of belief that their system is so star-spangled and superior that they don't need to have the talent that they once did. In particular, you look at their draft history over the past 4 to 5 years, and it seems like they don't care that much about getting talented players in there. There's been a lot of misses and not a lot of contributions coming out of the draft. And I talk about this often when you're trying to project how a team is going to change in future seasons for the better or for the worse. I always say you look at that 2 to 3 year draft window and then that 5 year draft window, and that will tell you what a team is ultimately going to be. And based off of the mediocre at best performance of the New Orleans Saints over the past 5 NFL drafts, with far too few, players actually on the roster contributing in any way from those draft classes, and in particular, far too few impact players coming from those draft classes. Maybe again we should have seen this coming. And you also had stars failing to deliver as expected. I mean, people look at Drew Brees throwing for 33 touchdowns and almost 5,000 yards passing and assume that he had a typical Drew Brees season. Well, if you watch the New Orleans Saints in 2014, you know that that's clearly not the case. That's not to say that he's a bum, and that's not to say that he's washed up, but we have to call him as we see him. This was not Drew Brees' best work ever by any stretch of the imagination. And there were periods of time where he started to look old. There were periods of time where you maybe started to wonder if his game was and is in decline. Because you look at the numbers and you're like, yeah, but when you watch him, you're like, ooh, some throws that were really off the mark, some really bad decisions, too much forcing of the ball. And then you look at somebody like a Jimmy Graham who got that big contract in the offseason. It didn't play to a level that you would expect Jimmy Graham to. He battled some injury problems, that's for sure, but teams started to figure out that if you get in this guy's face and you're physical and you try and take him out of the game, either you'll take Jimmy Graham out of the game or he'll take himself out of the game. And when I come to that point of an arrogance of a belief in the system, a system is great, but you got to have some guys too. And the Saints had no 1,000-yard rushers, and they had no 1,000-yard receiver in 2014. They really lacked impact difference makers on the offensive side of the ball. And when you are an offense-first team, you have to hit on that side of the ball. And the Saints were too up and down in 2014 to really have anything go well. And when I talk about the overreaction to 2013, Rob Ryan came in as the defensive coordinator, and there's no question the Saints made dramatic improvements on the defensive side of the ball. And people, I think, were automatically assuming that the 2014 unit was going to be as good, if not better. And that just simply didn't happen. They had 7 games where they allowed 30-plus points, and you just can't have that if you're trying to be a playoff team. What's even more ridiculous for the New Orleans Saints, and when you talk about the struggles of this team and how they ended up 7-9 and picking 13th overall in the 2015 NFL Draft, you're talking about a Saints team that's supposed to have one of the best home field advantages in football, maybe second to Seattle. And they lost 5 straight games at home to close out the season. Their last 5 home games, they lost them all. They finished with a losing record at home. In most cases, if you finish with a 500 or worse record at home, you're not making the playoffs. You're not even going to be close to sniffing the playoffs, because it should be a hell of a lot easier to win at home as opposed to on the road, because if anything else, you should build your team around being able to win at home. This is a Saints team that for years has really dominated people when they've come into the Superdome, and that definitely did not happen in 2014. They themselves got dominated. For the Saints to go 3-5 at home tells you all you really need to know about how this 2014 season went. And even when you look at them offensively, this is a team that they were leaders in the league in third down percentage. They were leaders in the league in first downs per game, but they still finished 7th and 9. It's 7-9. Just think about that. A team that made the divisional round of the playoffs this year, a team with Drew Brees, one of the elite quarterbacks in the National Football League, found a way to finish 7-9. And it's amazing, especially because you look at it and you say they have the best third down conversion percentage in the National Football League. You're talking about one of the best disciplined teams in the league. They were second least penalized team in 2014, and yet they still found a way to finish 7-9. When you look at their offseason, this is kind of where we come to some of the problems with the Saints. Jairus Byrd was a bust for them in 2014. That doesn't mean he's always going to be a bust for him, but he was this year. When you combine that with the fact that they got absolutely nothing out of Vaccaro to the point where they had benched him at one point in time, it's not hard to see why that defense got a whole lot worse in a hurry in 2014. In terms of other moves they really made in the offseason, nothing really made a huge dent in anything. In terms of the draft, the only real contributor that they got was first-round pick Brandin Cooks, a good solid fit and a great fit for that system that they have. But once he went down with an injury, the offense just wasn't the same. And he was really, again, the only contributor they had out of that 2014 draft. And that's a problem, a big problem, and a big trend for the Saints team, is that they have 5, 6 picks every year in the draft, and yet they only find one guy that typically can contribute on a consistent basis. You're not going to win anything doing that. And all that's going to happen is you're going to spiral downhill even more. When I look at the New Orleans Saints heading into this offseason, going forward into 2015, some of their needs, first and foremost, they need a complete and total philosophical adjustment on the offensive side of the ball. I know Sean Payton loves to throw the ball. I know Drew Brees loves to throw the ball. But you cannot sit there and continue to expect to have the type of success that you've once had, continuing to do things the same way, with an aging Drew Brees, with fewer weapons around him in the passing game on the offensive side of the ball. This team needs to learn from the Dallas Cowboys model and become a more run-based team, not with 3 or 4 running backs doing this or that or not a whole lot of shit. They need to have that one featured back with a nice complementary back and really take some of that burden and pressure off of Drew Brees. This is a team that needs to run the ball better and especially more consistently. That's always been a big knock that I've had on Sean Payton's offensive play calling philosophy, is that I thought he threw the ball far, far too often. This is a Saints team that needs to rein that in. They need to change their ways, and they need to make a big adjustment on the offensive side of the ball. Because the more pressure you take off of Drew Brees, the better I feel that he can be in bits and spurts as he reaches the tail end of his career. When it comes to the offensive side of the ball, Drew Brees is still your franchise player. You have to protect him. You have to build around him. And the Saints, frankly, have done a criminal job of building around him in recent years. You look back at 2010, sure, they got him Jimmy Graham, and past year, they got him Brandin Cooks, and that's all fine and good. But they haven't really gotten a whole lot of real quality help around him. Mark Ingram finally played well in 2014. Kenny Stills is a 5th-round pick from a couple of years back, of 2013 or whatever. He's played well, but then again, that's about it. They really need to do a better job of protecting Drew Brees with that offensive line. This is an offensive line that has been bad the past couple of years and doesn't show any signs of getting better. They need help at tackle. They need help at guard. For the type of system that they run and what Drew Brees is as a player, the fact that they've so criminally neglected that offensive line just absolutely blows me away. It astounds me. They must get better on the offensive line. They need to establish a more physical identity and be able to give Drew Brees more time to throw in the passing game. They also need some help at wide receiver. You've got an aging Marcus Colston. You've got a Brandin Cooks who's coming off of an injury but played well. You have Kenny Stills, who's a 5th-round pick from a couple of years back, who shows some flashes, but that's kind of what he is. He's a flashy type of guy. I don't think he's a consistent performer. They need a bigger, more physical target on the outside to also take some pressure off of Jimmy Graham. They need a number one type of pure wide receiver on the outside, and that's something that I think that they lack, and it's something that Drew Brees and this offense under the Saints desperately need. And then when I look at the defensive side of the ball, obviously they need help there, and they need to make some significant adjustments there, and they need to improve their talent level on that side of the ball. And I mainly, look at their linebacking core. I think their linebacking core is doo-doo, perhaps one of the worst in the league. You could say whatever the hell you want. It's just the way I see it. Talk about Junior Galette, who actually himself had a solid 2014, and then he decides he wants to go beat a woman. So will he be back? What's going to happen with him in 2015? Even with that being said, they really didn't have a whole lot of pass rush besides him and Cameron Jordan, excuse me. That was all they had. They really don't have much else in the way of pass rush. They need to get more pass rushers on the outside if you're running that 3-4. They need some help at inside linebacker, too. I'm really not impressed at all with their inside linebackers. To be able to run the 3-4, you've got to have a nose tackle. You've got to have at least 1-5 technique end, and then you need that linebacking core to really deliver, because that linebacking core is really, truly going to be the basis of everything you do in any type of 3-4 defense worth a damn. And the Saints linebacking core, not good. Henceforth, their 3-4 defense, not very good. This is a New Orleans Saints team, again, that maybe we should have been better able to predict what was going to happen in 2014, because the warning signs were there. And unless they do a really good job and strike it big in this offseason when it comes to the NFL draft in particular, this is a Saints team that could be even worse in 2015. I truly believe that.